Yeah, definitely. And you get the feeling you're really talking to a sort of something that feels human. If you say something slightly differently, they're very literal. They literally interpret what you're asking them. Instead of us being the content creators, that will be the content evaluators.
Yeah.
And that we'll rely more and more on AI to produce content, but then ultimately we have the final say as to whether something's helped us or not helped us.
I'm going back to your kind of golden age. Maybe this is also the window where people also have the ability to critically evaluate it.
Exactly.
Because in 10 years' time, if all you've grown up with is answers from ChatGPT, then they all look the same.
Hey everyone, welcome to the AI Canvas, the podcast that explores the impact of generative AI on businesses, the arts, and our everyday lives. I'm your host, David Foster, co-founder of Applied Data Science Partners and author of the book Generative Deep Learning, Teaching Machines to Paint, Write, Compose, and Play. Now, over the coming weeks, we'll be diving deep into fascinating conversations with a diverse range of thought leaders, including musicians, artists, journalists, educators, marketers, lawyers, and those at the cutting edge of this fascinating field. We'll explore their unique insights into the opportunities and potential threats of deploying this technology across industries and how it's going to reshape our world. We have a fascinating conversation ahead of us, so sit back, relax, and let's dive into the world of generative AI right here on the AI Canvas.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the AI Canvas, the podcast where we talk about all things generative AI and their impact on society, businesses, and everything else. Now today we've got a really interesting episode lined up because I thought what we'd do is bring in my amazing co-founder, Ross Witeszczak. We co-founded the company 7 years ago now, and I thought it was a really good chance for us to just have a general chat about how we've seen AI change over that time period, because I think it's fair to say that 7 years ago, what it meant to do AI is very, very different to today. And generative AI has obviously had a huge impact on that. So, Ross, do you want to just give a quick intro to yourself and how we started the company 7 years ago?
Sure, yeah. I guess my background has been in data for my whole career, doing various aspects of data analysis, data science, commercial finance, marketing analytics, customer analytics, everything to do with that over the years. So we started the company 7 years ago now.
Yeah, coming up
after seeing the kind of things that we're getting back when we were using external consultancies, and I think it was great is probably generous, but good at showing strategy papers and giving this is what you could and should do. And I think what we really wanted at the time was someone to just do it. I mean, that's why you look to outsource things, because you need someone to do the work, not to tell you how you could do the work if you did it yourself.
Yeah.
And so that's, I guess, where the applied bit of the business came from. And I think not looked back since. It's been fun.
And it's been really crazy, like especially the last 6 months, seeing what doing AI means. And I think businesses up until this point have always sort of seen it as a big exercise in acquiring data, building training sets, training your own models and deploying them. But now it's almost like everything's flipped on its head. And the question now becomes, what can you do with this new technology? Because a lot of it is hosted obviously off-site. So, if you're using like OpenAI's APIs, then you've got to be thinking about data privacy and, you're sending potentially data off-site. And so it's less about what models can you train in-house and more about where does the data go. So all of these security considerations have suddenly risen right to the top. And it's a big part of what we have to do now as a consultancy. What are your thoughts? Like, how have you seen stuff change?
Yeah, it's interesting just on this, as you say, this last kind of, 9 months now. One thing I remember I said in a meeting today, which being with a client, is that on the traditional kind of AI or anything hype cycle, you have this trough of, here's what it's legitimately capable of. Mm-hmm. But with ChatGPT, it really hasn't troughed.
Yeah.
I mean, people can see for themselves that it can actually work. So I think that's been quite good as driving people's belief that it can do things, is that the proof is out there. It's not just this thing. I think, the whole balancing on the data security and the data privacy thing it's been quite it's a thing that I think is holding some organizations back, thinking I can't use ChatGPT, which sometimes is the right decision. And I think the work that we've done in the last kind of 2-3 months on the in-house, the LLMs, has given us a good idea of the capabilities of them. I think that was something when we did the very first Mosaic implementation, like pre-Falcon, looking at how the it's not up to
Yeah.
ChatGPT scratch, and I think that's understood from the beginning. And I think just more if we focusing on actual things that you want to do, just accepting you're not going to get this generalist that can write you a bid on on 15 points and write you a plan for doing X, Y, Z, but actually it is and can be good at doing a specific task and get better. And I think that's what we're now telling clients to manage their expectations, but also, if you have something in mind that you want it to do, coupled with the kind of the other things we're talking about, things like vector databases and how you can seed these LLMs with good information, good knowledge that actually can draw from sources when generating responses. I think it's a really interesting thing.
I think the thing we've obviously seen businesses come up against time and time again is, how do I even get started? Where do I start? What do I tackle? Because the best way I've heard this technology described is it's a mechanism for dropping the cost of human thought to zero. And that's where we're at. We're at the point where the actual instantiation of a thing that can produce human level insight is fast, rapidly reducing to zero. And I think businesses are grappling with this idea that it's not just about language, it's not just about text to text models. It's about, what about if this thing could act as an advisor? What about could it act as a customer service agent? Could it act as an agent that's able to summarize a huge amount of information very, very quickly? What could I do with that? And so a large part, you're right, that what we have to do is to help clients to work through these different things that they could potentially do with the technology and prioritize. And then after that, only worry about things like, which model do you use? Should it be in-house or should it be externally? Leveraging the likes of ChatGPT. Just helping companies to get started is a big part of what we have to do.
I agree. Yeah, it's I think, just quoting Zine today in this meeting, it's the wood for the trees. I think there are a lot of operational things that these models can do. You're absolutely right. That I think I've described in the past as almost, if you treat them like a straight from school lever, how can I train this person to do it? But fundamentally, it's capable of doing it for 24 hours a day and learning and getting better. And I think that's very cheaply. And I think that's the other thing that we've kind of talked about is actually when we're building these systems, that even over the course of the projects that we're doing, the capabilities of the actual LLMs, the in-house ones, by the end of the 8-week project we just finished, it was fundamentally better than the first one. So when we're building these systems, you're building within them with the LLM shaped hole of
that you can switch out.
That we can switch out, because we switched it out like 3-4 times in just one project because it just kept getting better. And actually, it is around building the operational stuff around it, the analysis, the understanding, how do I build the guardrails around it to make sure that regardless of the model I use, it's going to be not producing things that I'm not going to be happy going out in front of people. How do I seed it with the correct information and kind of managing that aspect? So I think it's really good and it's really powerful. And I think you're absolutely right. It's a very practical way of doing business. That's because, go back to what you said at the beginning, data science and machine learning stuff used to be about how much data have I got in a nice steady format that I can build a model on and train it to do something. Whereas now it's a case of there's something that can act like a human interpret.
And that's the beauty of this technology, is it's zero shot. You don't need to train it necessarily on a particular task. It can just quickly have a go at something that has never really been shown before. And we've obviously had a ton of projects recently where we've had to judge the benefit of fine-tuning against better prompt engineering. And that's something else that's coming up time and time again. And then, even with fine-tuning, you're facing problems like overfitting to a particular task, and you lose the generalization capability of the model. But then in the prompt engineering, I've heard many companies now are actually looking at hiring people that because we know it's difficult. We've seen it's not the sort of thing that you can there is a real art to it, I think. And you mentioned their guardrails. That's another thing I think is super interesting with this tech, is that we've always built guardrails into everything we've done as a company, but it's a different kind of guardrail now, where the output can be, very, very flexible. Like the whole point of using an LLM is that it's got the flexibility to respond. So whereas with your ML model in the past, you might be putting guardrails in, like if the model returns a response below a certain threshold, you treat it differently. But now we've got to handle natural language as almost like the new interface, the new API that we're working with. Do you think companies, how early do you think companies need to start thinking about guardrailing when they're running projects like this?
I think as soon as. I mean, it's every company has its own risk approach to risk. And I think on these things, where it comes to automation, when we're building these models, people saying, how can we recognize that someone doesn't want to talk to an LLM?
Yeah.
So first thing I think we always advise is never hide the fact that you're talking to a model. Be upfront about it, and then give people give people the option to opt out and talk to a human. And I think that's something that's really important. I think there are the ability to make sure that someone isn't going to use it to generate content you wouldn't be happy with. And I think there will be people who will see, oh, it's an LLM. What can I do? If I respond to this, how can I get it to say something that I'm then going to be offended by?
Right.
So I think that's the kind of guardrails around the language aspect.
Yeah.
As we said, the ability to seed it with relevant information, so that it's not just making things up. You want to generate the response and the context, and how to write a good email or write a good article or a good response on a chatbot or whatever. But fundamentally, you want it to be talking your language and talking about the things that you want it to do. Yeah. Which might be, placing an order or selling a car, or asking if someone is happy with the charge or whatever it happens to be. Yeah. So I think they need to do it, and it's interesting. We talk about the prompt engineering. It's a lot of our clients as well are talking about it to us. So it's not us saying you need to hire one. Yeah. They're people saying, do I need to hire one?
Exactly.
Can I have it? And I think when we've demoed some of the products, and they can see how, just by switching out some of the specific prompts, what the impact is, and things like accuracy of what we're getting back, where we're trying to extract information, etc. Right. They really are susceptible to prompts.
Yeah, definitely. And you get the feeling you're really talking to a sort of something that feels human. If you say something slightly differently, they're very literal. They literally interpret what you're asking them. We've had examples before, where we want the information extracted, but it ends up writing me a Python program to do the same thing. And
it gives the answer.
Yeah.
Your Python application will output this text. Like, great, could you just return me the text rather than trying to write me the code?
Yeah, exactly. But this is where it's interesting to see OpenAI, I guess, go down the route of functions and code interpreter, and they're obviously releasing a lot of tools around the LLM, and that's what we're finding as well, is that the LLM just ends up being one part of a wider machine.
Yeah, I think that's the engineering aspect of implementing these things.
Exactly.
You can say, yes, it can, use an example, it can pass a purchase order, and but it's got to do something with that. It's got to interact with the systems. It's got to be able to pull it from your CRM. It's got to be able to check order information. That is the interactivity of the LLM.
Yeah, the wrap
of the kind of the wrap around it, knowing that the LLM itself will change. And its job is to do the job that you prompted it to do, but you've got to do something with the result, and that's, I think, the engineering challenges around, which is why I love the end-to-end stuff, because it's not just a case of looking at when we go back to why we started, looking at the problem in isolation. You would say, I need an LLM that can respond with X, Y, Z information, or can create this. But actually, I think the bit that we really enjoy as an organisation is seeing it end-to-end, which is why the applied bit. It's building a container, working with the data, getting it into a dev, then a QA in a production environment, and seeing the outputs and seeing the impact. Because otherwise, from what drives our team and what drives satisfaction, why people want to work here, is they get to do all of that stuff. Yeah. And I enjoy it, you enjoy it. It's why we do it, and it's the ethos that we try to promote amongst the rest of the team as well.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think that sort of human evaluation in the loop is a really important part of LLMs that perhaps other kinds of machine learning you don't need as much, because it maintains its quantitative nature all the way through the process. Whereas with an LLM, you're by definition having to interact with something that is incredibly flexible and ultimately based in natural language. So baking in right from day one the feedback loops that say, here's 100 examples of what's been generated. Could you just give me a quick yes, no on all of them? And then we try and optimize that metric throughout the project. So there's not just, we're not just looking at the quant stuff that's coming back off the models itself, such as cosine similarity if we're using vector databases, but also, does a human say this is good enough? Ultimately, that is the test that we need to be passing every time.
Yeah, and actually, as part of this whole building up the confidence in the things that they're doing. So a client we were talking to a couple of days ago, they want the LLM to do all the exciting stuff and generate it, but fundamentally, when it comes to the actual response, they just want to hit copy, paste it into the email themselves. So almost that they are the firewall between the firewall and also the quality assurance process. So eventually, the automation, that final kind of last mile, which is it's not a technical challenge that they can't overcome. It's that they've decided not to overcome it yet. They want to copy it out and paste it out. And I think that human QA process
definitely
is super important, and it gives them everything they want to do as well. Which is they want management oversight of this, and I think actually this is kind of from a role perspective. I think in future team managers, you'll get humans, at least in the interim, managing kind of teams of LLMs that are reading their outputs in the same kind of. If you think within a call center, a team leader will listen to a percentage of calls after the fact as part of training and quality assurance and making sure that people are doing that. When we're talking to clients now about doing quality assurance on LLMs, I just said just treat it like
an agent.
Just read them as you would do anyone, and let's give feedback. And I think as when we start treating them like that, it's either a good thing or a bad thing that they're good at customer services. But that's just it is. So.
I think there's a few things that we've pulled out there. So, anyone listening looking for kind of top tips of how to actually do LLMs right in a business, I think, human in the loop at all times. Don't ever deploy without looking at stuff that's coming back. Making sure that the choice of model isn't everything. Too often we see both businesses focusing on, should I go with this model or this model? What happens if a new open source model comes out? And as long as you're building stuff in a modular fashion that allows you to make that switch, then you don't really need to worry. Just use whatever's working now and give yourself that flexibility. And I think another one that we touched on earlier that was really important is, making sure that there's all of this guardrailing around the LLM. It reminds me of, when you evaluate a car and how well it's doing, you're not just evaluating the engine's performance. That's just one part of the system. How comfortable is it? How does it turn around corners? How big's the boot? It's like all of this sort of stuff that fits around it that matters.
Don't forget to kick the tires.
Yeah, kick the tires and see how it performs on a wet surface, on a dry surface. You've got to constantly be testing these things like you would do any other employee that's in your team, and making sure that those systems in place. So maybe let's just talk briefly as well about where we see things going with this tech.
So I do. One of the interesting things as well, when we were just kind of talking about customer services, when we've talked to organisations and they've said, will people feel comfortable talking to kind of machines? And well, people do that anyway. I think people will get increasingly comfortable in the future that they are talking to a fully automated systems. Will accept in the interim that they're going to be mistakes, but fundamentally they're getting better. And I think one of the things that I do say to clients that there are some times where there are many times where customers don't want to speak to a person. They just want an answer or a resolution, and quickly. Yeah, they want it quickly. They don't want to sit in a queue and talk to someone. We've all sat waiting an hour for a call. They don't want to do that, and it's like and as much as organisations want their team on value-added things that actual customers want to talk about and engage in conversations. They don't want the basics done. So I think as far as adoption, I think wider society will adopt it because suddenly they'll realise they don't have to sit in an hour queue to ask a simple question, which takes 2 minutes for something to be able to answer. So I think society as a whole will start adopting that. I think businesses, we've obviously seen even larger businesses announcing that they're just either pausing recruitment or they're just going to replace people with that, or more to the point, it's that kind of efficiency standpoint of do use the LLM for what it's good for and use people for what they're better for. I think it's just going to be a massive increased adoption. I think there's going to be a catch up of the open source with ChatGPT and etc. So we've already seen the evolution. It's been 8 weeks since we started doing this, 10 weeks maybe, and we've already moved from a Mosaic 7 to a LAMP 70B, which is much better.
Right.
I think that the businesses that are potentially kind of sitting back and thinking, do I, don't I, just knowing that, as you said, you build this operation or engineer a solution with an LLM shaped hole, which can just be swapped out in future, then you don't need to worry about too much. It's going to change your future. Of course it will. All technology evolves. This just happens to be evolving much quicker than everything else. Interesting. What are your thoughts on where it's kind of going next?
I'm really interested to see where the big players start to make moves. I mean, we've already heard about Microsoft announcing Copilot, for example. And I think what businesses need to be aware of is that there is going to be an undercurrent of generative AI that I think sits through just about any commercial enterprise product that's going to be put out by the likes of Microsoft and Google going forward. So is there value of building in-house your own system that can continue a paragraph for you? Probably not, because it's going to be in Word. Yeah. However, there's going to be operational things that sit outside of just typing something in Word or typing something in Excel or an Outlook email that are going to need real thought as to how you implement them as a business.
Well, I think that's potentially slightly disagree with you there, because at our scale, paying $30 a month for people to have Copilot is incredibly effective. But because we can't, building our own in-house, probably look at a situation where we could do it, but really do we need to? Whereas if I'm an organisation where I've just got, let's say I'm an organisation with 1,000 employees, which is not huge, that's $30,000 a month. That's $360,000 a year
to bake it into.
Suddenly, for what I needed to do, potentially actually in-house is significantly more cost effective.
Yeah.
If you've got 10,000 employees, that's nearly $3.6 million a year on that. Well, it's going to be much, much cheaper to do it. So I think it's anything. There's going to be an economies of scale thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Either Microsoft need to come down on their pricing, which I don't think they'll do. I think they'll milk this, as quite rightly they should, as an early adopter, or the businesses that the bigger ones we're working with, which will just say, right, well, it's just too expensive. It's not too expensive, but it is actually cost effective for us to do this in-house instead. So I think it's going to be the balance. I think it's like businesses our size are always the ones that benefit from the $20, $30 a month subscription models, because it's just whatever the tool happens to be. And I think the middle ground would be those that kind of I guess stand both sides of should I, shouldn't I, and then there's the big ones I think will continue to build their own in-house because it makes sense.
And I think there's the benefit as well of if you've got your in-house LLM, you can use it for multiple tasks, and unless you're fine-tuning, in which case you would obviously need to save out a separate set of model weights, there's going to be a need for a general in-house LLM for about every business, I think, going forward, because there's going to be stuff that you don't want to have to go through data security, information security on every single project. You want something that you can quickly test against, and that's where the in-house LLM is going to be really useful, I think. Be interesting to see how Azure and all of the other big cloud providers are going to offer data security where this model is truly yours to own, and no other the data isn't going to be sent anywhere else. It's within your tenant, and whether companies are going to be comfortable doing that, because obviously cloud databases at the moment where companies are quite happy sending their data off to a cloud database,
isolated.
Maybe completely isolated. So I think LLMs are going the same way.
I think so. Just even looking at the Azure ML stuff, when they talk about using a 70B, it gives the specific VMs that are going to be spun up behind it. Yeah. So they're trying to drive the confidence that it is
yours.
It is yours. Interesting enough, Microsoft doesn't unfortunately offer the A100s in UK, which is what a lot of the models are. You have to go Europe North, North Europe, which I probably should look at where that is, but we haven't been able to do it because a lot of our clients like UK South. So
GPU access is going to be. It's the big question, isn't it? Like what? Nvidia must be.
Well, they did. They did incredibly well at share price because did exactly that.
So it's interesting to see where it develops in future, but maybe we should look backwards as well and sort of just briefly talk about how we started as a business, because I think for anyone listening who is wondering, is this something I could do? Could I start my own business? Maybe let's just give some thoughts on things that we've learned along the way, things that we think would be great advice to anyone starting a business, and especially today, because it's if you're starting a company out, maybe you're building a product around generative AI, you've got to make sure that product is incredibly flexible, I think, because you never know what is around the corner with Gen AI. It's moving so fast that you can't be absolutely sure that the model that you build today is going to be relevant or valid for the next let alone a year, maybe months. So my top advice would certainly be to keep things flexible, and we've always done that. I think as a business, we've been super flexible to new technologies, making sure that we maintain that learning in house, that we're never falling behind. And I think it's important to hire people that have that same ethos.
I think one of the best things we did was we quickly realised that actually building around data science, just being able to adopt software engineering practices. I think we a lot of when we talk to data scientists, when we're interviewing, people are still heavily in Jupyter. People are still DevOps is separate and this is this, and someone else deploys it and I can just build models. But actually, just by having people not just do the end-to-end as individuals, but being part of the whole experience and that mindset of, how do I write good code? We still sometimes start with Jupyter, but how do I get out of Jupyter and into VS Code and write stuff as quickly as possible? Because that's where it's going to be most beneficial. So I think adopting software engineering practices as part of Dockerization and containerization, especially when we have people who use Macs and people who don't use Macs, Windows machines. So that stuff really helps. So I think there's a lot to be said for that. I think on a more practical standpoint as well, if you're going to start a business, get a co-founder. I do. I mean that in such a way as it's almost like the support network aspect.
Definitely.
Starting a business is
100%.
It's hard. It's a challenge. But having someone who's going through the same stuff as you, I think, really helps.
Yeah. Two felt like the right number as well when we were starting, because I feel like if there's too many voices in the conversation, it ends up becoming a bit of a. It's great for, one of us can have an idea and the other one can say that's a terrible idea, don't do it, and that's great. And I think that to have that sort of back and forward is essential, that you don't ever get blinkered by your own vision.
I agree, and I think you start having then 3, 4, 5 and too many, and then you're at dilution. It's got to be meaningful. I think having a meaningful share of the company is probably the main thing. I think the growth aspect is challenging.
It is,
If anything else, we've done it without investment, and we've been quite clear that that's what we wanted to do. It's provided its own challenges, but then its own rewards. So we don't answer to anyone, which is nice. We answer to each other, which is good. And it's meant, we can be incredibly flexible, as you say, when we want to do stuff, as we want to move towards doing more private sector or public sector work, or move towards particular industries. I think we've been quite flexible towards that as well. We've never specialized for our kind of business. Some businesses would have gone down I'm going to be data science in financial services. I'm going to do this. Whereas I think we bring, there are elements where you need domain expertise, and that's something that you can almost learn and bring on board as well. But fundamentally, a lot of data science is historically been transferable skills. You're building a model. And yes, you might need to understand the data, etc. So I think that's been exciting.
100%. I think, just thinking back as well, I mean, we've been so lucky with everyone we've hired has been really contributing to the business, and we've found that actually the interview process has adapted over time. We've had to really change it from early stages where it was more about, maybe here's a machine learning problem. Can you go away and sort of solve it for us and come back and talk us through what you found challenging and how you approached it? Whereas today we're moving more towards can you debug stuff? Because I think, especially with the likes of ChatGPT being so fantastic at writing code, what we need are people who have that attention to detail and can look through a code base, quickly spot the bug and fix it. Because LLMs aren't going to give you the perfect response every time. And whilst for a lot of projects we use them as a support for writing boilerplate code or getting started with a project, it's never going to get you to 100% code that you want to put out in front of clients. So I think going forward, like what people need to be looking for in candidates, but also adopting if you are a candidate, is being super sharp at fixing something that isn't going right in the code base, and being comfortable with reading through error messages and getting to the bottom of why something isn't working. And that's what we look for, certainly.
It is. It's the mindset that comes along with that, which is how do I follow my way through a stack trace? The reward of getting to the next error is obviously underestimated. It's like, I do like a new error. New error means I fixed the last one. And as you said, we use GitHub Copilot. And I think it speeds it up, but it only speeds up processes if you understand what you're doing in the first place, and you can read through it and go, that's not quite what I meant, or that's not actually going to do what I think it does. It's great to have it all written out, and it's great that you can scan the context of what you've been writing and carry on a function, etc. But fundamentally it's because the people know what they're doing in the first place. I think the other thing about just on the last note on the interview process is that the big benefit is that we used to ask people, as you said, to go away and do this. It's a large investment in time, I think, from people. I think I always felt a bit uncomfortable saying, can you come away and do this? And we'll give you 2 weeks and do it in your own time. You don't have to do 2 weeks worth of work.
No.
Whereas now it's a case of, we'll do it in the day. And yes, we're not going to sit in the room and watch you debug it, and please use Stack Overflow, but whatever you need to do, don't. I think we said don't use ChatGPT. Don't use Copilot to write the text and debug it for you.
But that's an interesting point, because I think if I look forward to think how are we going to be interviewing people in another 7 years' time? You think about people coming out of university now who are taking computer science. They're going through the course with ChatGPT. and Copilot and all of these other tools. And I think I wonder, and I'm a little bit worried actually about how coders or just anyone who's involved in writing as a job, not just code, but other forms of writing, whether they maintain that critical thinking that we had to have when we were writing code going through courses at universities, degrees. I think what is essential that educational institutions look at is how they embed critical thinking, attention to detail, just general sort of not being lazy and just writing good code because you care about it into people, rather than just thinking, well, I've got my Copilot, I write a brief comment about what I want to write, and that's probably good enough. But to be critical and actually go through it and write better, that is what we're going to be finding it increasingly hard to find, I think, because people will rely on these tools.
Yeah, I agree. And I think as you said, schools need to teach that critical thinking, but I think that's what schools have tried to be teaching for quite a while. It's not about learning by rote, which some countries can be accused of. Their educational systems are learn by rote. Here's some facts, learn it and repeat it, and
absolutely
pass test. I think at least the UK educational system has been more creative and critical thinking. I think I'm a little less worried. I think if some comparisons are drawn to when calculators were allowed, and people said, you shouldn't be allowed calculators until year 10 or year 9 or whatever, because we need people to be able to do mental arithmetic. I mean, I use Excel for maths. I've got an Excel window open probably most of the time. That'll be doing my maths, doing my basic maths for me. I don't think it lessened, whilst it might have lessened my specific ability, it didn't lessen my ultimate ability to do what I needed to do. You
just got better at doing it faster because you didn't have to kind of sit with a pen and paper and work stuff.
So I think people will learn with these tools, as you're saying, they'll learn with ChatGPT, they'll learn with Copilot, and it will become their way of working. It's just more natural to them. And it might be weird for us to think about it's too much of a crutch, we might be uncomfortable with it, but we've probably just got to adapt it.
I think you're right.
In 7 years, I mean, if in 7 years I'll be thinking it and
it will be coming up on your screen. Goggles.
Musk will have fixed that for us by then, and Neuralink will have figured that out for us. So I think it's going to change, and I think it's the same way now that when I grew up, obviously very, very young, but when I grew up, the internet was just a brand new thing, and you didn't have access to all this knowledge. Whereas now we do, and we want people to use Stack Overflow. We want 5 years ago.
Yeah, exactly.
Part of our testing process, interview process, if someone said, I'd use Stack Overflow to get that, we'd be like, tick, great, do it. That's what it's there for.
And
I don't think it's going to be any different.
It'll be the same idea. As well, just the last thing maybe we can touch on briefly is, that a lot of this data that is now being produced is ultimately going to be fed back in potentially to large language models going forward. And we might be at this sort of golden period where LLMs are still relevant. They're trained up until data that's absolutely current, but that data hasn't been watered down by its own feedback. And this, people have already talked about this idea of this negative feedback loop where ultimately they're going to be training on data that has been produced. And Stack Overflow, I know, have just announced recently of Overflow AI, which is a system that now is going to be using generative AI to produce real-time answers to users' queries without having to wait for the community, and that is going to be up-weighted or down-weighted based on human feedback. So maybe that's the way that things will evolve, is that instead of us being the content creators, that we'll be the content evaluators, and that we'll rely more and more on AI to produce content, but then ultimately we have the final say as to whether something's helped us or not helped us. And that would be a really interesting mechanism to build into future LLMs, is that maybe they're trained on things that humans go, this was really helpful. It's an interesting way of sort of thinking about it.
But going back to your kind of golden age, maybe this is also the window where people also have the ability to critically evaluate it.
Exactly.
In 10 years' time, if all you've grown up with is answers from ChatGPT, then they all look the same. You haven't known any difference. So we're still in that age. I'm kind of hoping that OpenAI are doing that. If someone says regenerate, or someone says no, fine tune this or whatever,
it's
kind of hoping that it's learning from the ones where there was positive sentiment about it, not the original one it spat out that was far too verbose.
Exactly, I think for sure. I mean, this is the whole premise behind reinforcement learning with human feedback, I think, which is the idea that humans ultimately are saying that was a good response, that wasn't, and I'm sure that's something that'd be actively embedding in. Cool. Well, it's been awesome to chat. It's very rare that we get the chance to just have half an hour to ourselves to chat about things. But I hope you enjoyed that. That was a bit of insight into where we think generative AI is going, where it's been, and what we're doing today. yeah, let us know in the comments what you thought, and come back next time for the next episode of the AI Canvas. Thanks very much.
Thank you.